Welcome to It's a Rainy Evening. It's the end of the summer. Piddling down out there. But we had a good one, and come on, I was in the hammock today, chilling out for an hour in pleasant sunshine, so I can't complain. That's been a long, lazy summer. Well, it's the weirdest year in history, frankly. Anyway, I'm the scariest at the moment. Harley Benton, there we have it. Ooh, take a look at what I've got here. Dun, dun, dun. Ooh, look at that, glooped up. We have to have a close look at what we've got going on there. Look at how deep those slots are. Not what you want, really. That's, I don't know if they will call that Tusq. It looks like NuBone to me, but the other one was Tusq, the other Fusion, but it was, I think, the more expensive one. Got some grime here. Look at that. It's not fab. You know, I'll oil that and we should lose the sight of it, clean it and oil it. But, you know, it's not the cleanest thing in the world. But it is a fab looking thing. And, you know, what have we got? We've got a double cut in the classic Gibson styling. Solid body, thick, same thickness all the way. Slab-like, nice rounded edges. White fittings in this. There are black fittings in the box, but I'm sticking with white for the time being, partly because everything else is going to be white coloured, including the tuners and the cover, the truss rod cover up there. So unless Tim tells me he wants it black, which is easy enough to change over. We've got the simple type of bridge here, which I'm not a fan of. I don't think it looks very nice, but it's perfectly effective as a wraparound bridge. And to be fair, with these things on the back and this long travel length here, there is quite a lot of adjustment room in it, so it is a good get out of jail. And the other thing as well is, it for a cheapie, which it is, you'll see that it gives you pretty impressive brake angle. Some of the recent not Roswell, I'm looking at that thing there, some of the recent Wilkinson type bridges come around and have almost no brake angle here, and then when they tilt forward a little bit, as they always do, that brake angle disappears. Here there's first of all, this does hold it flat by the looks of it, because it seems to screw down pretty well. I mean, it's a standard fitting, so we can check once it's off, but having a look at it from the side, that looks pretty straight to me, so I don't think that's tilting at all, which is unusually good. Some of the Wilkinson modern wraparound ones tilt. The mismatch between this kind of part here, the arms, the U shape that holds goes onto the post, is just too sloppy, and it tilts forward, and then whatever brake angle that was marginal anyway there disappears. But this has got bags of brake angle. Or I guess you get a slightly sharp and scratchy thing out of it, but that's no big deal. Anyhow, like the other one, both of these came with slightly scratchy frets. These are actually not quite as scratchy as the Fusion ones, which, considering that's a more expensive guitar, isn't really ideal. But you can see here there's quite a lot of detritus kind of ground into here, and you know, these are, I don't like this kind of material, as you probably know. So as requested, this is going to get an adjustable Tusq nut in replacement. So I think first thing is we could get on with that straight away. So let's have a close look at the nut and see what we've got. So this is going to be a setup and light fret leveling. I played this the other day, and I have to say it was great fun. I didn't like the nut slots on it. I didn't like the nut. There was I think there's a very, very slight choke out, a very tiny choke out, but it was, you know, they have got much better with the frets. And for 150 quid or whatever this was, it's a lot of guitar for not a lot of money. And what was great about, oh no, this is really, no, there's a gap there. That might be, my concern is when the Harley Bentons are guilty of doing this. The glue, the finish is sprayed on, often is sprayed on after the nut. As a result, after the nut's put on, and as a result, it goes up the front of the nut and it glues it in place, in addition to the super glue that's already there holding it in place. And the result of that is that when you remove the nut, unless you go the whole hog and drill it off or Dremel cut it off, if you try and tap it off, you can all too easily break this finish here. So some people get freaked out when I go to the lengths of getting the Dremel cutter out, but you know, I'm the guy who doesn't really want to be watching the customers. I've seen that blue, it's quite striking. I don't want to be the guy who has to tell the customer that this, God, you can see all this stuff here. God, what was that? That was a bit of foam shoved in there to fill the... It actually made a complete mess inside the adjuster. It's all clagged up with paint. So the question is how grippy is this paint down the side of here, and will it try and break off? Now there's a clear gap here which suggests to me this wasn't made in that method, so I'm going to take the risk of tapping it, but if it doesn't do its thing right away, then I shall know. I mean, yeah, I think that's going to be okay. It's come off. The question is how much movement is there in it? It's insane, this whole thing. You pull it up and you're going to get something break. One of the things I have said in the past at this point is, if you're going to do this, then I recommend you get your razor saw, and cut very carefully now down into the joint between the neck, you know, the nut and the finish, because the way I look at it is, if something's going to be broken or has to be cut, then I would rather I was cutting it in a straight line to achieve that, than this thing was just breaking randomly when it felt like it. There we go. That's how to break your blade. It does happen. Right, let's get another one. Yeah, so yeah, the logic makes sense, I think, to be the one to cut the material, because then you've got a straight line cut rather than run the risk of it breaking in some random way that you've got no control over. Because a straight line cut across there is, you know, mostly hidden by the truss rod cover, so it's not an ugly looking thing. Whereas if it goes off on its own, splintering, you know, it'll come all the way, or go where it wants, basically. Right. So there's my blade changed out. I've got a box over here which contains all the blades. Someday I'm going to have to melt them down or something. Okay, so I'm not sure about whether this has broken the seal yet, so you know, do you know when it is, or you know, how do you know? I don't know. So I'm just going to scrape down there, and I can feel the thing. Now what I'm feeling like, oh, there it comes. Now it's coming off, and there, this is what you get very often on these Harley Bentons. It lifts up a piece of wood with it. So in changing your nut, you get this bit, and that is also, there's a bit there and there's a bit there, so it's taken two bits, and they've got some, they've drawn something on there. Now we can probably restore that little bit into those things, but technically that doesn't absolutely need it, because this thing will still, the new nut will still sit comfortably on that slot, whether it's completely flat all the way across or not. I'd rather it was, so just for, not for any argument about tone transmitting itself across the wood into the such and such. That's all a bit sort of magical mumbo jumbo. But so this is, as you can see, oh, can you see? Yeah, you can see. That's a typical situation. There's nothing you can do to stop that. And I have to say, Harley Benton, not only do they glue their nuts very firmly, I find, to the wood, they also end up with this situation where it quite often pulls out a chunk of material. Now the question I've got to do is figure out how and where this joins up, and whether it's even worth. Sometimes it's not even worth it. By the time you've messed about trying to refit a piece of runaway stuff, your glue's dried, it's made more of a mess than you had when you began. So sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. We shall see. If the other downside about when you do something like this, you tend to raise the surface, because no matter how well you place this, it's actually very difficult to make the thing you've just put in sit straight. So if I take a bit of glue, a little bit of glue in there like that, it's not much at all, and then I take the, see, how do I handle this thing? It's got some glue on there, see if it will stick. Okay, now we drop it sort of down into there, and we try and push it into place. Give it a little push sideways, push it down, that's about right. I'm just guessing now, hoping it won't stick to my finger. Get the old saddle, no, the nut slot file, push down on that. So we'll get that to stick, which is unusual for, in my experience, it often doesn't fit back in. So that's fitted back in. We might just save this other little thing, but again, part of the trick is cutting off the bit that you'd lost and remembering what the shape is and which way round it goes, because I really don't quite know. And then if you do get it the right way around, how the hell do you get it to stay where you want it? Because you can blob some glue on top of it, but will that do anything, or will it just cause it to stick up miles in the air? So that sort of sits in the right place. Now I could put a tiny bit of glue on here. We'll do the same thing again. Now that doesn't really want to lift up, so I'm going to try this time drop a little bit of glue on top, if I can even remember where it's gone. So that's a bit of glue on top. I'll let it sink down into there if it wants to, and any excess that hardens I can clear off with the nut slot file. Yeah, you can see there's a big blob of glue there stuck to the front. So we've also got some glue on the front edge of that thing at the front of the fingerboard, fingerboard. So we need to take that off as well, or carefully remove that. And then we need to do a little bit of sizing up to get the nut right. So the nut is already got it's got the flattened grub screws in it, so that will sit on its base, and it's got a little piece of brass in the base unit to take the load of the grub screws, if you know, to a little bit stronger than the plastic of the base, basically. So a little bit of scraping there to get the glue off the front edge. Now we've got our adjustable nut sitting here. It is just about exactly the right, fit. In fact, it's almost too tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the guitar to one side and get the sanding bench up, or sanding block. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just make sure these two sides, the front edge, is flush. So that starts out with a bit of a sort of run down here on the rough stuff. Now this little bit of taking the plastic edge, it's dirty because it picks up the muck from the previous sanding. Then I can just kind of use the finer stuff here to tweak it. And what I'm looking for is a smooth, flush finish. So it's kind of better if you have a completely clean one, but it doesn't stay clean for long. So just to begin with, I've got a nice flush surface between those two, and they will go up against the end of the fretboard. This isn't so important. It's kind of got the texture of the 3D printing machine technique, so it won't be by default completely flat and smooth, but it's okay. It has a sort of workable texture. It's got a little bit of a lip on it that I could take away, just so that whatever I'm working with, I know it will just fit into this slot pretty well now. And the next thing I'm conscious of is that it's a little bit tall right now for the nut slot, because when I put this adjustable nut in, what I want it to do is to sit with, when it's wound down, which it currently is, I want the strings to sit on the first fret, and then I want to just go up from there until I've got the target first fret action that I want. Again, it's a bit mucky because of the previous thing, so I'm just working this down on the Ultra 80 grit stuff, nice and square, right angles, that's good. And then a bit of cleaning up on this one. It looks all a bit dusty at the moment, but it will clean up as we go along. Let's have a feel. So I'm just for a second putting it on the shelf, nut shelf. That's still a bit tall, so I'm just going to take a bit more off with the 80 grit, a little bit harsher. And then I think I'll also have some reduction possible with the sanding, the fret shelf or slot sanding block, that will help just lower it down to where I need. If I can't get it to where I need to begin with, then I'll switch to a different base unit, because I've got a shallower set, or a set of shallower ones. So you can see that that's sort of slightly mucky slot. That's how it came. Now I'm just going to clean up the base here. Okay. Tidy up the like I say, if around about now, and once I've done the little bit of sanding on here, if it's not low enough, then I'll just bin that base and go for another one. So I'm just going to do a little bit of sanding on here, recognizing that I've put some glue on and pushed a piece or two of timber back in that came out. So hopefully that gives us a better substance surface to put our nut on. This is not a very raspy file. It's made by Tusq, same people that make lots of good quality tools, Japanese luthier tools manufacturer, but it's quite it's gentle, so it doesn't really take a lot, but it's probably for the best. Now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to tighten up this middle one and pull the thing under tension and just get a quick look and see whether that pretty much sits on the first fret. So I think we're all right there. While I'm at it, I'll put the other strings back on. Oh, actually, you know what I'll do first before I do that? Since I now know that I'm about the right height and should be workable, I'm just going to mark up the frets ready for fret leveling. Since the strings are out the way to begin with, it seems a sensible thing to do. And the slight discoloration on the fingerboard in places, I will look to clean that up once we've done the level and things. So I'm kind of taking advantage of the fact the strings are off to just mark up the frets with the black marker. Save time and pulling the strings off and on again. So now these are in the way. Let's come to the wrong place. Over the top. Come on. Right. Oops. So that's the only downside of these wraparound bridges, is that the strings can come so far off that they fall off sideways, and before you know it, you tighten them up with the string either right off the side of the thing or down in the off to the side of the notch on the saddle. So it's a bit hard to keep track of things. Right, so having got the nut pretty much the size I want it, I'm just kind of tightening things up, putting it under load to see where it actually now seats. Now, as it happens, it's still, I think, sitting a little, maybe a bit higher than I want on the bass side. In fact, they're all sitting. They're all playing, so nothing's actually sitting right on the fret just yet, which is it's okay. It's as long as it's below the action, my target action, then I don't mind if it doesn't start touching the frets. But it might still be a good idea to change down a size. So why don't I do that, just to be on the precise side of things. Always look on the precise side of things. It's not a big deal, and it's usually one of two sizes that is what we're after. So I'll take this one off. You'll probably get to see my little brass insert there, which I'll keep for another day. And let's get a lower one from my collection. Where are they hiding? So where have I put them? That's not. Ooh, forgot about them. Put them there. Where's my? I think we lost them. SP side dots, countersunk push switches, adjustable nut bases. Probably the worstest place to put them. Somewhere where I fail to see them every time. So this one's okay. This one's slightly sticking up. All right. So we start again with a lower one. Go back to the. Fit in our little bit of brass thing, and again this will probably fit very closely straight in actually, but I will still do the front edge just to flush it up with the front edge of the nut. I was watching TV last night, watching those frankly courageous young people in Moscow and St. Petersburg taking a stand against Putin's mobilization. You know, it's very easy to forget how much courage that would take if you were facing the threat of I don't know, up to 20 years or 10 years, 15 years in prison for taking that stand. That is a real act of bravery. And it seems at this point in time, seems so futile, because the security goons were there, you know, on an industrial scale. And somebody, commentator I was watching said, no principles, no real allegiance to anything other than serving power and staying close to corrupt power themselves, you know, so that they avoid being punished or locked up. So it's a horrible, and I was really struck by the atmosphere of fear that was around on this video. You know, people kind of looking around with a really scared expression on their faces. Okay, so this is quite low. That's a low one. So this bridge now is quite standing up fairly high out of there. So maybe what I needed was an in-betweenie, but I don't really have an in-betweenie. But it'll be fine for now. So let's tune it up to approximate pitch. Yeah, it was very interesting thinking about this and discussing this thing, this business the other night. And one of the things that I think in the West, inverted commas, that we lose sight of quickly, or we get sidetracked with, is that I keep hearing commentators and you know, pundits trying to struggle to make sense of Putin's propaganda. You know, they're going, but this doesn't make any sense, and can't you see that, can't his people see that it's absolute nonsense what he's saying here about such and such? And or alternatively, you know, we can see this is absolute gobbledygook, why can't his people tell that? And of course, you know, Putin knows that we know he's lying about the numbers, and it doesn't matter that he knows that we know he's lying. What matters is whether or not his people will believe it for as long as he needs them to believe it, and that's the only kind of measure of it that has any relevance, really. Do they believe it long enough for him to set about doing what he needs to do? For example, the mobilization, suspension of various rights and laws. And we've got to get off this thing of thinking that surely it's so obvious that it's a lie that ... Yes, of course it's obvious to us it's a lie, but he only cares whether he can pull it past his people long enough to, you know, achieve his plan. Right, so I have the neck relief set very flat. I have the action set very low, 1.5 mils and 1.2, just about, only just. So now I'm going to do the fret leveling, very gentle fret leveling, and just make sure that every note plays and that every bend that we need to play plays. So this is what we're doing, and as I've said many a times before, and it'd be no surprise to those of you who've watched any of my videos, but the difference between doing a setup and not doing one, doing a setup like this with the nut work and the precision leveling, fret leveling, the difference is that when we were kids, if you remember our first guitars, we basically, well, that is flat. We basically we played whatever action was given to us, which was possible. So the frets on our guitar basically set the playing action that was possible, and you remember that you'd adjust it down until it couldn't go any lower, and then at that point you would back off a bit and play it, and that was your lot. And usually that meant a fairly high action, because the frets underneath weren't capable of, they weren't in any kind of state to allow a low action, because they were uneven, because they usually are from the factory or from the beginning. These look in good shape. They tend to, there's no major ups and downs on here, which is a good sign. And I can tell that from the first pass of the leveling beam. And there's a slight low spot here, but actually, generally speaking, it's very good. So I'm not staying long on the leveling. I'm just doing it enough to diagnose if there are any issues that need taken care of, and then taking care of them with the minimum amount of leveling. If the frets were almost perfect to begin with, or allowed us to play at the target low action right from the off, then I wouldn't need to do any work, except where, for example, on the Fusion, the last guitar, Tim's other guitar, the frets were nearly perfect, except they were scratchy because they hadn't been polished out. These are scratchy too. Okay, that's good. So it's going to be a very light run across. I think everything's going to play pretty well. From the first run I can tell that the frets are more or less fairly level, and I'm sure, well, I hope that Harley Benton's upping its game on that. I know I know Epiphone certainly got a lot better with its inspired by Gibson range recently, or in the last couple of years. They were noticeably better than the older Epiphones. So they've got better at it, whatever the quality control that they're doing. As what changes they've made, I don't know, but it's worked out, which is good. But obviously in doing the leveling, I take care of the any tiny highs or lows, and then at the same time we also polish out the frets. There's just that little hint of zzz, but that I think is more because this is barely above the 1mm mark. Yeah, I would say that's more a height issue than it is a leveling issue. To just overcome that, we can go back by a quarter of a turn and get it back to 1.2, where I would normally target it, and that's still very low, and then yeah, clear it up. So that's absolutely fine. So now we go onwards to the D track and so on. Yeah. So yes, very weird day, and watching those young people just getting thrown into these buses. And it's funny enough, they were brutal. Well, they were very visibly aggressive and quite rough with them, kind of pushing them along the streets. but then they sort of just pushed them onto these buses, and they didn't follow them onto the buses to tell them what to do or to hurl them into a seat. They just kind of left them, and all the young people, you could see them just kind of walking back, accepting their situation, walking back and sitting down and getting their phones out and calling whoever they had to call. And so it sort of looked as though it was something that they kind of were used to, and it's probably not the right word, but they were kind of not surprised that it would come to that, and they had expected it. And I suppose if you live in Russia and you know what the security apparatus of the state works like, then I don't suppose it is any surprise to you when the minute you transgress and make a protest, that they come and haul you in front of a magistrate or court or whatever. So, but it is a phenomenally odd time when you think that the 300,000 people that are now they've already planned it, so they'd lined up their first hit lists of people, and they've already served them with their conscription orders. But a lot of them going straight in now are without any military experience, despite the claim that they'll be drawing from people with military experience. So it's going to impact thousands and hundreds of thousands of young Russians and totally blight their lives in a way that they shouldn't have to start off with. So that's got to go up a bit down here, because that's quite a little bit too low. So we may have to go some halfway mark on the adjustable saddle part of things. I mean, it works, but it's standing a little bit taller than I would like. It's doing the job. What I might do is try and find if I possibly have a halfway sized one, so I don't have to cut one of them right the way down. But if I don't, then I will cut one down. I mean, that works. It just looks a little high out of the base. I mean, if it works, you know. Right. So having done the leveling, now I'm going to remove the strings, and these can go in the bin. They've done their service. Yeah, I don't know, what a horrible thought. I mean, everything's a horrible thought around this Ukraine war, right away from total annihilation of humanity thanks to the ambition and stupidity of mostly one person at the moment, right through to, even if it proceeds on, if we're lucky in inverted commas, and it only proceeds on conventional terms, then the thousands of people who will, the hundreds of, possibly 100,000 more people who will die, and that's too far up on its stalks. So I will get out this one. See, the problem with that is that's It's now going too low for my liking. I'm going to see if I can find a mid-ground. Yeah, you know, all those, if we're even lucky that, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, it's just an incredible situation. You know, and to have those young people with no training, precious little effective hardware, you know, and sort of find themselves chucked into this maelstrom, or whatever it would call it, this hell. What was that description in the from some old author? The place where laughter and sunshine go to die. Youth and laughter go to die, I think it was. Wow, I mean, what an awful description. Okay, so that's fractionally higher, maybe. Let's try that in now. Yeah. I mean, but it's a incredibly sort of black and white situation. You know, there's some people who comment saying, you know, well, you know, we must get the Ukrainians now must settle and sue for some peace, you know, that stops the violence and stops the fighting. And then you think, but how do you settle and give away somebody's territory? How does that work? I think I will throw that one away anyway. Yeah, I mean, how do you tell somebody to, oh look, it's so that the bad people don't kill any more. How about you give away a fifth, let them keep it, and we'll sort of call it quits. We'll hopefully settle everything down. And that seems like mad to me. And I mean, that's, without a doubt, that's allowing an aggressor to win, you know, for their aggression to pay off. And I guess somebody might say, well, look, let's be just completely pragmatic about this. Yes, I know it's allowing aggression, you know, brutality to pay, but what else would you want to do? I mean, when you stop and consider what are the alternatives? You fight and thousands, hundreds of thousands more people die. Is that a good idea? No, and I suppose then you start thinking, well, are we really just looking at what's right or what's utilitarian? You know, do we say, look, it's better to give Russia that 1/5 of Ukraine and allow Putin's imperialism to pay dividends, because it's utilitarian when compared. It's a utilitarian general good when compared to the alternative, which is hundreds of thousands of humans on the planet die versus a fifth of a small-ish country. You know, and you kind of go, well, okay, the utilitarian end of it, of course, suggests, well, if it's one versus the other, then let's just go for giving away a certain amount of that territory, because, you know, that's surely better than the death of the extinction of human life on the planet if it goes out of control and blah-de-blah. And yet, why didn't we do that in the Second World War? You know, why didn't we just say, well, look, we could reasonably predict that a world war will cost it, I don't know, 50 million lives, and surely our sacrifice for the good of mankind would be to let Hitler have what he wanted this time. suck it up and save the other 49 million as yet unkilled people. And I don't think anyone would have been proud of having done that. I don't know. Well, we didn't do it, did we? We seem to make a virtue out of taking a stand on democracy and freedom and those sort of nice, lofty ideals. And everybody seemed to agree that was the right way to do it. Mostly agreed, anyway. So it's a very difficult bargain or calculation, isn't it? Who, how, and why, and God, can I get this to go in here? Can I? How? Blimey. For some reason now I can't get this in there. Let's dig out a bit of this end and see if I can fit it. Anyway, yeah, so it's a really difficult thing. You know, our principles of freedom and human integrity and dignity and those things that we think Russia has left behind or chucked away, do we believe they are worth fighting for at any cost? Because if we do, then we have to pay whatever the cost might turn out to be. And I suppose the tragedy is that we went through that time before in the Second World War, and I guess before that even, and it didn't seem to do the learning that a lot of people at the time thought we would get from it. Well, we'll never do that again because we've learned from this dreadful human catastrophe called the war. Maybe we learned for 70 odd years or 80 years or whatever it was, about 80 years, maybe that's how long the learning lasted. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe that's all we're capable of doing. Maybe in human terms, maybe that's actually a hell of a long time, and we should be glad that the lessons of that stuck around even as long as they did. But they haven't really lasted us any longer than that now. I don't know. I've read a lot about the way Russia's behaviour and conduct in the Second World War, and in particular I've been reading quite a bit about the Warsaw Uprising, so that the way that the Russians basically left the Poles, well, the way they treated the Poles in the beginning of the Second World War anyway, to kind of help Germany to kind of carve it up. But there came a time when the Russians were heading towards Warsaw and beating, the Nazi Reich as it was, and the democratic Poles, you could call them, the Home Army, represented by the democratic government in exile, that army organised an uprising, which in itself was an incredible feat of bravery against a far superior and far better equipped adversary, the German military. But the citizens of Warsaw summoned the courage to launch this uprising. But at the same time, the Russians already had their own agenda with Poland, and they didn't care about helping the Poles in any which way. Even then, all the Russians cared about was stamping their control over their influence over the Russian over Russia after the war. So the Polish Home Army, on the verge of kind of being wiped out by the Germans, knew that the Russians were on their way, coming closer to Warsaw, and they chose that moment to launch the uprising. And I think there was a kind of a vain hope that the Russians would help come to their assistance, basically, and they didn't, and they stayed outside of Warsaw, and they left the Poles to fight against, or left the Germans to basically destroy, or Russians were hoping the German Wehrmacht, or the SS I suppose it was, would destroy the Home Army, the democratic would-be government of the future post-war Poland. And so that the Russians stayed back to allow the Germans to finish off the Poles, and then only kind of came into Poland once that had happened and the Poles had to surrender and give up. And then, even then, Russia's only concern was to get its own government installed, pro-communist government installed, which it did. And so the poor Home Army people who launched their uprising against the Germans were begging Churchill to influence Stalin to come to their assistance, and Churchill, to be fair, tried, but he couldn't get Stalin to do anything, and Stalin stayed back, and as a result, eventually the Germans defeated the Home Army resistance, or the uprising, with only one positive, I suppose, came out of it. The only positive thing came out of it was that the Germans allowed the Polish Home Army to be considered as soldiers, as protected to some degree by the Warsaw Convention. There, what is it, the Hague thingy? To get proper recognition, because without that they would have been just taken to a forest and slaughtered, the survivors of the resistance or the uprising. But the cynicism and the callousness of the Russians at that point is breathtaking, really. They had no interest in saving these people. Their concern to set Poland up as a Russian state, or a communist state, was more important to them than the consideration of the lives of 50,000 fighters, Polish resistance fighters, and or the hundreds of thousands of civilians who were killed in the siege or the fighting. But incredible. So of all the people who know the callousness of the Russian mindset, I think it's the Poles are at the top of the list. And I would listen to them and respect their take on it before any Western commentators on what the Russian mentality is, what they're trying to do or not trying to do. Of course, the Poles had such a tough time because a lot of them were sent away to gulags and imprisonment. Despite being treated as soldiers, combatants, they were sent away and didn't get out for. Some of them never got out. Some of them got out. Took years to get out. They were treated worse than the Germans, which is ridiculous when you think about they were supposedly on the same side, in inverted commas, fighting Nazism. But of course it wasn't anything about that. It was about Russia positioning itself for its own advantage, or Stalin, I should say, and the Kremlin. But the Poles that got away into exile and stayed abroad and came to this country and other countries faced a really difficult situation. I think one of the things I read today actually that really surprised me was the Ministry of Pensions, although that it was known, it was accepted that the Home Army was recognised as a full combatant status. The British government managed to avoid paying pensions to the Home Army fighters, and so they kind of sat in Britain, having to take lowliest jobs because there was no benefit for them, and they were decent hard-working religious people, and they didn't even complain. They went out and did the thing and worked in demeaning low status jobs and made successes of it. And of course in doing that they kind of shone a light on the slightly stereotypical British workman who would sort of sit around all day and take 5 times longer than a Polish team would take to do this equivalent job, with their endless tea breaks and complaints and whatever. And so in being hard-working and capable of working for less and not ripping people off, the Poles were incurred the resentment of the British for undercutting them, in the way we've all heard versions of it even since. They come over here from the EEC or the EU and they undercut us, they work for peanuts, and we can't get a living wage, and these were the poor guys that had already been completely betrayed by the Russians, kind of betrayed by the British, and then betrayed again by the British general public, who resented them for their hard working, their hard work ethic. Forgetting completely, or temporarily forgetting, that these people had fought for Britain, and a number of them had been fundamental to the Battle of Britain and the defence of Britain from Germany's invasion plans. Incredible, but there we are. So I've always had a lot of respect for Poles, and I listen to them very closely when they tell me what they know that the Russian government is doing, because they have a better angle on it than most. Anyway, So now we have that's ready to go back on. I will just hold off from gluing it for a minute until I make sure once it's back on that it's in situ and it's about the right height. I don't want it to have to knock it off or break it off to do it again. It's currently I've reduced down the top a little bit, so it's sitting slightly out of its base anyway, even without winding the thingies in. So we've just got to make sure that that is the right height. I think it should be just about right. But we'll come back to that when we put the strings back on. So for now, I'm going to go through the process of masking off the whole of the neck, and with a view to sanding and polishing it out. And I won't do this on camera because I'll take a break, have a drink, and I'll come back when the frets are sanded out and polished, and it'll be time to just make sure the nut is good, and then restring or oil the fingerboard and restring, and then that will be it. Tim had asked me on this one to kind of consider what there was about these guitars that could be improved, and actually, apart from making sure that the nut was Tusq and it was at the right height and slots were correctly cut, etc., I wouldn't say there's an awful lot to do. I mean, tuners are always, you know, improvable, and that's a pretty, you know, it goes without saying almost. But generally speaking, there's not a lot on these guitars, and therefore not a lot worth changing out. Only, you know, insofar as you could put a quality P90 in there if you knew, or not knew, if you knew the kind that you liked or had a particular preference. You could spend 200 quid on a really top-notch P90. You know, if you had a particular one that, you know, that did it for you, and you know, I know that if I'd done that, people, or if whoever chooses that option, people then go, oh God, your guitar costs 120 quid and you put a £200 pickup in it. And the actual answer to that thing is, yeah, why not? I mean, why wouldn't you put a £200 pickup in a £120 guitar? Providing that the £120 guitar is sound. And if you look at this Harley Benton, it's so simple that, you know, once you get the frets leveled and the nut right, what isn't there to like about it, you know? So I would be quite, I'd suggest, you know, if that's the kind of improvements somebody wants to make, go for it, because it's you never lose on a £200 pickup. If it's one that you know you like, you can always take it out and put it in the next guitar that you have a kind of nice relationship with. And often it's probably the way it really works best is if you can acquire a really good pickup, and you know, often that is a matter of paying top dollar, but you can kind of keep taking it around until you find the unit that really works for you, because, you know, we're all different and we all have different sort of personal takes and likes and stuff, and it'll always take you a while before you land on the guitar that you just love and keep going back to. And it may be no real no sort of solid logic that you could explain to somebody why that is, but for you it might just be that type of guitar. And so when you find it and you arrive at it, you might say, well, I'm going to stick my 200 quid or 180 quid Lola P90 or whatever model it is into this, because I really love this simple double cut Harley Benton body, the blue thing. Everything about it's just totally dependable and simple, and why wouldn't I put a really good quality? Because the only other alternative is you say, Okay, well I'll hold on and I'll wait until muck. Wait until I've got a £1,000 Gibson body to put my 200 quid Lola into, and there's nothing wrong with that either, but you don't have to. There's no particular reason to. Nobody says that you can't use up your great pickup in a cheaper body. So, you know, they're all interchangeable, and I just did that the other day with my PRS style build that I made for myself. Well, I made this, I was going to sell a while back, and I haven't sold it, so I took it out and did a couple of rehearsals with it and realised I absolutely loved it. So I thought, I'm going to gift it to me, which I did. And then I kind of thought, well, all right, well, what pickups would I like in it? And it actually already had Warmans in, and they were really fantastic. But I'd always had in mind that I would put rail hammers in it if I liked the guitar. And lo and behold, I liked the guitar, so I put rail hammers in it. Took them out of my Oakcaster headless, my first headless guitar. So now I've got the PRS style, which I also corrected the slight misalignment, which annoyed me, and so I thought, well, I like this enough to put the time into it, so I spent an afternoon up here or an evening up here correcting that, lined it up, got a perfect alignment, and at the same time changed the pickups, and so now it's, you know, none of that is wasted. I could always take those pickups and put them back in something else if I found a guitar I liked more. But why would I? I like this one, that one, and I think that's what I tend to aim to do, and that is to arrive at a guitar that I really love, rather than I've never thought there's one out there to go and buy that just does it. For me, there's something about working towards the thing that really suits you, you know, and recognizing that it probably isn't out there just on the shelf. It's out there currently on various different guitar chassis, and you just kind of nick bits from one and put it on another. Anyway, so that's the way I've gone, and I think, you know, that really applies to this kind of guitar. There's absolutely nothing to it, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly good. You know, maybe the only thing you might not like about this sort of double cut is, you know, double cuts tend to feel great when they're sort of tired, old, battered, and I'm not a relicking fan for the sake of it, but a kind of worn old double cut, there's nothing quite as good a feel as that. It just feels like a guitar that's been hammered and played and loved and beat up. So this is, by definition, it's new, and it's a bit polyurethaned and prissy, and it won't relic the way you sort of want some old bit of nitrocellulose to relic. But, you know, there's maybe, you know, as part of the fun, maybe you strip it off and you do a couple of different coats of one colour over another, and in thin nitro, and sort of let it wear at your own hands in a sort of realistic relic over time. But again, you know, that if you want to do that sort of thing and grow to love the thing over time because you put time into it and it's a thing of your choosing, then, you know, there's nothing wrong with this basic thing as a start point. It's just solid and ready to go. This board has had it. I'm pulling off more little shards of plasticky stuff or fibres, so it's really getting a bit hard to use. It was a bit of IKEA kitchen furniture, so I don't have any quickly to hand to pinch and use, but hey, anyway. went yesterday to Halfords in Plymouth and did a cardboard raid, and I hadn't really counted how much I'd got from their cardboard bins until I put it in the shed today and kind of tidied it up a bit, and I'd got 8 full-sized, very large-sized boxes, which adds up to straight away 16 guitar packings, which is great to have that much up front in storage, so I can not worry for quite some time. But I have to say, I could have taken twice that amount of cardboard probably yesterday, so it was a really good day for a haul. I just go down the back of it. A few times in the past I'd gone in and spoken to the staff and said, do you mind if I blah, 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 and then I used to ask them if they had any you know, boxes where they'd just taken the bikes out, and they tend, either they've got one on the go or they haven't, and they're all out the back in the skips. So I just started going out the back to the skips and doing it there, and I just thought, well, I've already asked them once, and if anyone ever speaks to me, I'll just say, yeah, I've spoken to your manager a few weeks ago, and he said, yeah, come and get the stuff out of the skip. So it's never been a problem, and it's a pretty good, dependable supply. So I shall continue doing that. So we've got, what have we got here? We've got 180, we've got a 240. So if I were to add this grade in, a little bit of extra steps. So we've got 240, 180 and 240, get them in the correct order. So 180, 240. So I think I said this on the last video, but I'll say it again. I think the StewMac crowning file is 150 grit. So I will go to 180 with this sandpaper, then I'll go to 240, then I'll go to 400 and onwards, and finally end up at the this stuff, micro mesh, which is getting ready to get thrown away again. Okay, so I'll go off camera for this because it's noisy and messy, and then I'll come back when it's done and we're ready to. Okay, hey, done, polished, oiled, everything ready to go. I'm just going to put the strings on with the bridge, and obviously we have to recheck the height of the angle, the setup and everything, because sometimes the bridge posts will move a little bit. So we'll get the strings on, and then we'll double check that the nut is at the right height before gluing it in place. We just need to make sure it's in the right way. Now this is a bit funny. It has to come down here, back over the top. Let's put that just there for a minute. Now these are a bit on the annoying side, these bridges, so it probably makes more sense to take that off and start with we'll put the D in and the G. In fact, we should just put them all in. That would make sense. And then we'll start by doing up the D and the G. The A. So I've got a fun thing coming up in a couple of weeks' time now. We're going to wedding gig at Dave's wedding, and it's quite we're not really a proper band. We've done a few rehearsals together and tried to get something worked out, so it's all a bit, well, it was meant to be more fun and informal because we're not a proper band, and then it got a little bit sort of serious in that the venue has some very strict controls of sound type of issues, so it suddenly started to feel yeah, what was just a bit of a fun started to feel a bit overly serious, but we should still be able to enjoy it. So and that's coming up in about 2 weeks' time. So we've got one more rehearsal on Sunday. All right, I'm just going to bring you up this end. A rehearsal on Sunday, and then next week we've got to go to the venue and see what it's like up there, and see whether we can even make any noise that we need to make, or the kinds of sounds we need, because we're not experienced in that way, so we don't know how to make a decent live sound whilst complying with the venue's strict sound control thingies. So all of that stuff is a little bit specialist, and usually comes with a lot of band playing experience. You know how you do all that stuff, and you're working with DI boxes and stuff. So anyway, it's all a bit new to us, but it should still be fun, as long as we don't take it too seriously. And Dave's done an amazing, for a few months ago he'd never played the guitar at all, to standing up and being ready to play, or prepared to play at his own wedding in front of all his friends and relatives. So that's almost more scary than doing a gig in front of complete strangers in a pub, because when you've got your family there, it's somehow there's a lot more at stake, and your in-laws and all of that stuff. So I'm amazed at his bravado. He's got a lot of cajoons, as they would say. These are difficult to get lined up, these blasted wraparound bridges. So just if I just look at where this sits a minute. Okay, that's pretty much sitting on the deck, so I know that's in the right place. So what I'll do now is I will put a drop of glue on this so it's put in place, and I'll get this out of the way. Right, tiny bit of glue on here. Yeah, so that's it's going to be, should be quite fun. It's a weird one, because apart from the people I'm playing with, Dave and two Daves, a Tony, a Holly, and an Emma, who's recently come on board with keyboards. Apart from them, I won't know anyone else. So I think it's going to be a little bit of an odd one from that perspective. So I think it may just be that I have a celebratory drink with them and hightail it after that, but leave them to it, kind of thing. But anyway, so that's yeah, that's coming up. I'm nervous about it, because I think there's quite a few lead guitar bits to play, which not really see myself as a lead player. So I've got to play a bit of lead guitar in what are we playing that's got lead guitar? Oh, Crazy Little Thing Called Love. That shouldn't be too difficult. I know the main lead bit in that. Then I've got to do what else? Highway to the Danger Zone, which is actually a surprisingly short lead piece, but it's a bit. I think the hardest bit I've got, as far as that's concerned, is controlling the sound, because it has to be quite a sort of big, distorted sound, whereas the in a live situation, that kind of sound can get out of hand pretty quickly, or it can sound just feeble if you don't have access to the volume you kind of need, especially if it's under the strict sound control. So I have no kind of sense of how we're really going to manage that effectively. It sort of works when you're doing it in a rehearsal, because you just sort of reach forward and grab the volume, master volume on your amp, and crank it up for. But even that's not really very professional or ideal, but sort of gets you there in a sort of clumsy fashion. But anyway, what else has got some lead guitar? Oh, there's the solo in Saw Her Standing There. We're doing 3 Beatles songs. only one of which has a meaningful solo in it, and it's actually I think it's one of George's. It's kind of a weird one. George Harrison weird solos. It's got a couple of really recognisable, good repeating bits in it, and then it's got a bit that I just can't get my head around because it doesn't really have any melodic. Doesn't seem to have much melodic structure to it, and it kind of defies my analysis in my mind because I have to be able to sort of sing a solo to be able to play it, and this one I don't think I could sing it if you paid me. Anyway, I've got sort of 2/3 of it pretty well mastered, so I'll fudge the final third and we'll see what happens. Anyway, so here it is, the E string going on. And that is that. Now all of these are now at a good low height, so they will come up nicely on the thingy, this thing, the raising thing. Oops, I've not got that one round the back of the bleeding thing. That's why it looked a bit low, because it's come off the wraparound bridge. That's the danger of these things. The strings just fall off the side at the back here if you're not careful. Right. So we'll go for a quick tune. Right, that's still a little bit low down here. Going on here. Hang on. Oh right, the action. No wonder that's not going to play. The action is on the deck down here. Start again. Right, come on. For some reason that's got set much too low. How did the action? I must have whilst cleaning it. I must have dialed in the bridge studs. Sorry about this, terrible view. Let us just pull out a minute. Yeah, I've managed to wind the bridge studs down so that the action's far too low, which is why it wasn't playing. Okay, one dead on, not yet. So half an undo, nearly a whole undo. Okay, 1.2, 1.4. That's okay. Now that's better. Let's drop this down a bit now because it doesn't need to be quite so high up. This end does need a bit of a lift. Everything in place. Right, now let's go back to tuning. Right, so it's raining out there. What I'm going to do now is just stretch out the strings, get all the slack out of them, and hopefully not break any, which I think I probably won't, because doing it with the doing regular tuners doesn't break the strings at the point of gripping, which seems to happen with the locking tuners, as you saw with the Fusion 3, which just grabbed hold of the thing, crimped it, and then kind of weakened it and then it broke. What I'm seeing actually is there's some blue paint on the edge of this fingerboard. That's quite interesting. I'm just going to see if I can just remove that little bit of paint. And it's gone into a little bit of a grain. I'm not going to dig too far. It's gone into some longitudinal grain in the rosewood, and it's come from the spraying process. So I think we'll just leave it. It's barely anything to worry about. So still some more stretching to do, and my advice is to, when you fit new strings, is to do this kind of stretching until you can stretch and the strings don't detune any further, and that means you've reached kind of stability. But until you've reached that point, the strings, your guitar will keep going out of tune every time you bend a string. So that little amount of detuning, if we hadn't have pulled it out manually, that would have eked its way out. At its own pace, when we least want it. So I'm just now doing, I think I'll just do one more now, and then we'll do the next bit, which will be checking the intonation of this beautifully simple bright blue beastie. Oops, come on. Okay, final one, tune up. Okay, so now it's time to do the intonation, and once that's done, we will be complete. Nice metal plate on the, what's this? Oh, ooh, there's a blemish here which I didn't see. And what that was, I don't know if you can see, down by the jack, a little ding of some sort. It's a, I don't know, it's like yeah, it is like a paint ding that's, it's like it feels like rust, but it can't be rust. Anyway, that's not great. Didn't spot that. Oh, Harley Benton. Right, intonation. That's annoying. I check very thoroughly, I thought, because it's nothing worse than starting out and, well, if I have to start out and point out something that isn't perfect or is a problem, then at least we can deal with it with the manufacturer straight away if there is a problem. But I don't like to find it when I've set up. Okay, so this whole thing is showing sharp. So there's a simple way around this. It means we have to slack off the strings for a minute. And what we can do is we can start by, instead of moving the individual saddles, because they're all sharp, they need to, where do they need to come? They need to come back. The strings need to be longer. Yeah, so we, instead of trying to move the individual saddles, because they're all in what appears to be a good sequence or a good arrangement, the correct stagger, nearly the correct stagger, actually they're a little bit off. But what I would probably start by doing here is taking this whole thing backwards a little bit. Now the problem with this is it is very difficult to do this with any tension at all. So you have to get everything really slacked off, which is a bit of a pain because I don't like doing it any more than I have to. So now we can look at turning this around. We're going to go, let's have a look. Okay. This is guesswork, by the way, so as you can probably tell. And I am looking to guesstimate about the same amount of backward movement. So I kept the stagger, all but this one, which I want to adjust. So the E is a fraction in the wrong direction, so I'm going to just bring that back into its correct staggered position, and the rest are relatively correct. Can you see that? That isn't. Oh, these cowboys, honestly. That technically is not right, but well, I know it's not right. That's probably starting to tell me why I don't like this bridge very much. So first of all, we're having to do this kind of adjustment sort of under pressure, which is not good. So I think I'm just about where I want to be with this one, but it means I've got to bring this one quite a bit. The reason I'm making these big adjustments is the person who's put this on in the factory has done it visually, but he's not taken into account the way around these saddles are, and they make quite a considerable difference. So when they're the opposite way around, there's about 3mm difference between the apex point of the saddles, and somebody not looking that close won't notice that, which is a bit crap. So I've done a couple of things here. I have lengthened the whole thing, but I've also had to move around the saddles relative to each other. So now we're going to have to start again. This is a shame because it's, you know, for every time I have to make this adjustment now, I'm obviously having to undo and do up the strings, which I would far prefer not to have to do. So good guess. Okay, let's start there. That wasn't a bad guess. So there's a couple of sort of movements all in one that I've done there. I'm putting this here so I can keep the jack plug off the deck. I think I'm just about right. Yeah. You see that once I've done the strings once and done them back up, we've reintroduced some slack, so we have to remove it again. Doesn't take as long, but we have to be mindful of it. Okay, we are there. Well, that was a good guess based on experience, but that was quite a way out. Again, it's typical of somebody who's just looked at it in the factory, sort of gone, all right, there's the visual stagger, that'll do me, we're done, and called it quits. So it wasn't, there's quite a big difference between that and it being correct. Anyway, so the next thing I'll do is I'll just put the cover back on here, because we have a very flat neck. This is deliberately very flat. Now this is something that in fact I ought to, before I finish, I ought to make a special case pleading for Tim here. And Tim, if I sound like I'm teaching you how to suck eggs, please forgive me. I just want this, of all people, you need to, or I need to be comfortable, confident that you know what to do. So taking this guitar back to Florida, where the weather conditions and the climate is completely different, this is set up right now for it's a very flat neck. I can check it, and there's hardly any curvature at all, but it's great in this environment. Makes it really easy to play. However, back in your environment in Florida, this may well change shape, and if it changes shape, then you may want to make an adjustment. So the key thing to do is, if you get home and the guitar that I've set up for you suddenly buzzes, it doesn't play, or something sounds odd, or its notes are choked out or anything, what's likely to happen is if the neck flattens out even more and goes back bowed, the notes down here, fretted notes down in the first half of the neck, might be buzzing and choked out. So let's say they are, and I want to put a tiny bit more relief into the neck. Okay, imagine that's what's happened, and if that hasn't happened but the opposite has happened, we'll do the opposite. So let's imagine the neck has flattened out too much. Back home in FLA, take off your thingy, get hold of your thing from your kit, your hex key for the neck, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put the hex key in the adjuster at the end, get it nicely firmly seated, and we want to slacken the what's it off this thing, truss rod, because it's currently, maybe on your trip home, it's gone back bowed, it won't play, and so we know that we can do the check. Sorry, that's what I forgot to show you. Duh. Here's the check. If you want to know whether it's playing badly because the shape of the neck has changed, hold down the first the low E string against the first and last frets, and that makes the E string into a kind of straight line between those 2 points, and then you tap halfway through with your thumb while still holding down, and you want to see some tiny gap. And people say how much? I just say more than none, and you'll know more than none when you see it. Right now I'm saying there's none, it's dead flat, which is risky because any tiny change and it may well suddenly start buzzing. So let's add a little bit of relief in, which I would be more comfortable having. But you could do this check for yourself. So if when you're home and you have a problem with any buzzing or anything, the only thing that's likely to change on the way home is the shape of your neck in terms of its curvature, flatness, or back bowed. So if you have any changes, hold down the first and last fret on the E string like this, check for a gap in the middle. If there's no gap at all, you want to do what I'm about to do, which is to slack off the truss rod a little bit to allow the, there we are, I can see it, to allow the neck, the strings, to pull a little more curvature into the neck. Now I say to allow the strings to do that because on simpler truss rods, that's what happens. The truss rod is a one-way one only, and it exists to counter the curvature that the strings put on the neck. More modern guitars like this will have a two-way one where you positively create flat neck or back bowed neck by turning it clockwise, or to allow a more curvature, i.e. the strings to pull the neck into more of a curve, you do it by turning it counterclockwise, and we judge counterclockwise by facing the end of the guitar like this, and I'm going to now turn it. Wow, that is stiff. Blimey. Okay. So I've done about a, what was that, a 45 degree of a complete circle turn, and it's very stiff, which surprised me. And now I'm going to hold it, and there is now a tiny bit of a gap, and it's making a little click when I touch it in the middle. That's because there was no gap before, and now there's a fraction. Now that's cool. Out of tune a bit, but it's actually fine. It's made it, it'll make it a little bit, well, a bit easier to play, less susceptible to flattening out in a different climate. Don't be surprised if when you make an adjustment to the truss rod, the tuning changes. That's quite likely. Now this is showing up as too high right now, so I'm now going to lower this down a fraction more. And I'll just double check this. I want 1.2 on the high E, which is about there, and 1.5 on the low E, which is about there. It doesn't need to be any higher than that. And I'm just going to go to there, and I think that's about bottomed out. Is it? Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. We're at the action. Okay, so again, I'll check. There's a little bit of space, about barely a tenth of a mil, but that's enough. Now, my feeling was that in cranking the neck here, the thing you've got to be comfortable doing is turning it. So I've turned it counterclockwise, theoretically slacking it off, and it went very stiff. So I'm going to turn it the other way to see what happens. Okay, and this is probably a good demonstration. Now this has now gone completely slack, and what I'm expecting to find is it will now start to tighten up again, and it'll start to turn in the opposite direction. So now I'm putting some back bow. I'm effectively straightening the neck and probably putting some back bow into it, some hump. Now it was straight and flat way before that, but now, there you go, look at that. Just that adjustment now means the strings are hitting here. It's amazing, isn't it? So that's the significance of the difference. Starts playing up here, just here, forget it. It's touching about here, right? So the back bow, the hump, is cancelling it out completely, and it isn't that much movement to kill all the notes. So you can see how susceptible or how sensitive this is. So that's why it's so important that you get comfortable. Now that was tightening it up, and remember, when I went back to the middle stage, now where it is, I've gone back several quarter turns. I'm missing sometimes. Now we're back in the loose department. Now if you remember, that's kind of where it was before, and actually when I did the test for levelness, there was no curvature in it at all. Now this normally I would expect the neck on loose truss rod with the string loading, I would expect the neck to be in some sort of curve, and this isn't. So that's an unusual thing. Not a brilliant thing in my view, because now what we have to do is I have to use the physical force of the truss rod now to manually turn some curve into the neck. So I've done it a little bit of pressure, and it still isn't doing anything. I'm going to put some more turns into it, or quarter turns if you like. Right, now you'll maybe able to see how it's going to start to require some more force. That was quite stiff. No chance of breaking it. That's the thing to remember. Now I'm getting a tiny click. and back playing. You see, that change in shape in the neck is very impactful on the playability of your guitar. It's a massive influence on how well your guitar does or doesn't play. So the tiniest change by the same token will change how your guitar is to play or make it unplayable. So you knowing that the tiniest changes in atmosphere and temperature can make those changes take place, you've got to be accomplished in making adjustments. So you see, I've gone from unplayable and manually cranked it back round to where I want it, which is about 0.15 of a mil, maybe 0.2. That's as much as I'd want in there. So it's a little bit more than none. And if you don't know what the number should be, and there is no set number, I would recommend that you get stuck into it, set it till it's dead flat, keep going into the counterclockwise, and you'll have to, on this guitar, you'll have to go into the physical forcing it, not forcing it, but putting load on it to turn it counterclockwise. And then you'll find a point at which it just starts to play, and at the point at which, when you hold down those two, you just see a tiny gap in this about 8th fret where you're looking, and you hear a click. As long as you've got a tiny bit in there, it'll suddenly play again. And you've got to find the sweet spot for you. Yours might be a tiny bit more relief in the middle of the neck, which is where the relief really shows up, because when it bends you get more relief. It stands out there. But so the point about this little demonstration is that you could see even the tiniest change in the shape of the neck, which I did using the hex key, even the tiniest shape going from slightly convex to flat to slightly concave to flat to convex. As soon as it went past flat into convex, it was suddenly unplayable. You might find the change in weather takes it from where it is now to just too much past flat. Feels nice, but it's starting to buzz and the notes are dying, particularly in the first half of the neck. That's always a good sign that it's convex backbowed. But you can see that I didn't have any qualms about cranking it in both directions, knowing what it would do in both directions, being confident that I could turn it with quite a bit of pressure, that every different neck will adjust with more or less totally different amounts of pressure. This is a very stiff one for adjusting. Most guitars that I will adjust, and probably your Fusion, won't take anything like the force it's taken me just to get this one concave enough to get that little bit of gap in relief, as we call it. So, but that's what it takes for this to play at this low action. If you had the action much higher, you would be far less sensitive to the changes in the shape of the neck, because those tiny little changes on a high action, talking about high bridge action, can occur without the strings being robbed of space to clear the frets, right? But the minute you've got a low action, which is what we often all want, those changes become much more impactful, and consequently you've got to be much more willing and ready to make adjustments like I just did. So I hope that helps. I keep meaning to make a sort of longer-winded explanation of that for customers who buy guitars from me or have them set up, because with a low action we can be victims of our own success, if you like. We can get a lovely low action, take it to someone's house in the north of England where they run central heating, and within 12 hours it's curved, or it feels like it's a mile high action, or it's gone flat, in which case the notes are choked out down here, as you heard. I mean, some of them are choked when you fret them, but they won't play around here when you fret them. Others, when you go far enough, or when the change in the neck goes far enough, as you saw when I cranked it and tightened it, I didn't even have to fret it. The notes were dead all the way up to, the strings were dead, unless I played beyond this sort of 2/3 of the way along mark. So that's really important. Low action means you've got to be confident, comfortable making adjustments to your truss rod, and that's how we do it. And you know, I just hope to dispel the myths that you can do damage. I actually did a video once where I tried to break a truss rod, and I failed to do it. I failed to break the guitar or the truss rod. Very, very difficult. You'd have to be swinging like a orangutan from the thing in order to break it. Very difficult to do. But you know, don't be Don't be at all frightened to give it a good yank. No pun intended there. Give it a good pull, and remember the sort of the logic is, how much relief do I need? The answer is a tiny bit more than none, and that is all you need to know. Don't bother chasing manufacturer's specs. Everybody will say a very different thing. You know, they'll, you know, you'll just again end up in a war of people telling you the correct thing is, and then they'll flame each other when they say something different. Just use, it's common sense. It won't play with back bow. You'll get what we saw. The strings are dead against the hill that's under here. They lie on the frets all the way up to about here, and then it starts to just about play when you fret from here on. That's because you've got a hill sticking up into the frets. So back bow is totally no for playing. Flat is just about okay, but as I said, it's incredibly sensitive to changes in humidity and environment, and so you can go, before you know it, you can go from beautifully flat and low and light, which is what I had to begin with, to oops, choked out because the weather's changed, it's flattened out a tiny bit past flat, which is back bowed, and then suddenly you've got the strings not playing. So, you know, have it where you like, but be cognizant of what happens when the environmental changes affect the shape of the neck. And it isn't a luthier's excuse. It really does change. The neck is wooden. It changes all the time, and probably never more so than going from a warm, humid environment like Florida, from a cold, humid environment like the UK to a warm and humid environment like Florida. So there we have it. Thank you for watching. I hope that last bit was helpful and give you confidence to make those adjustments yourself. There are your two guitars. I look forward to seeing you when you come over on around about the 18th, and yeah, see you then in person, in the flesh.